Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, a reminder to support this podcast. Your support is essential, crucial to keep me going. Otherwise, I'll have to do something else, such as sell tacos, as I like to joke here in Mexico. The best way to support Geopolitics and Empire is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. Every week, I do a video and audio weekly commentary that people very much enjoy, where I give a synopsis of the main events of the week. We also do a group Zoom chat for supporters only every week or two, and on occasion I bring back a past podcast guest to do a live Q&A with supporters only. Again, wherever you're listening to or viewing this, make note that the RSS feed of the podcast has changed. So go to the website to find the RSS feed, and it might not be showing up on your podcast player. So double check that. You can donate to Geopolitics and Empire, purchase a consult if you want to chat with me. Do check out all of my affiliates, the Escape the Technocracy courses. I get a commission if you check out those awesome courses: Wise Wolf Gold Above Phone, de-Googled Phones, Past Vaults, and Societatis Civis, and others. Leave a podcast review if you haven't already. And don't forget, we have also Geopolitics and Empire en Español, in Spanish. I'm not putting that out as frequently, but that's still there and available, and will continue growing as we go forward. Joining us is Richard Solomon, who's a geopolitical analyst and writer. He's also an activist, philosopher, and president of the Tao Institute of Cognitive, Martial, and Spiritual Technology, currently a metaphysical institution. He's also the author of the Tao Guide to Navigating the Satanic Matrix, which you can download for free from his website, taoisnow.org. The link is in the description. That's TAO isnow.org. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Richard.
Thank you for having me. Sorry for that short delay. As you stated, your description pretty much covers it. I think where I'm at right now is best explained through the title of my book, The Tao Guidebook to Navigating the Satanic Matrix. And I'll dissect that into two parts. So let's just hit the Tao real quick. Tao is a spiritual technology that developed in China. It was authored by Lao Tzu, which means old master. It's kind of a mystery, just like the Bible, of the authorship and, who wrote what. I guess it's somewhere around 400 BC to 100 BC is kind of, the theoretical timeline. The point being, the book, I've written the book because I believe the Tao is an excellent guide to dealing with what we're facing today. Just real brief, the Tao is a spiritual technology that looks to the natural world to kind of navigate through this. So what's happening in nature, the laws of physics, laws of chemistry, could be macro or micro. And that's kind of the guidepost. So I would put forth somebody like Buckminster Fuller, who wrote the book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth in the 70s, where he talked about combining technology with ecology. In other words, making the technological world and the ecological world or the environment flow together. And also, Tao is important now because China is a rising power, it looks to me, based on that we seem to be pivoting out of Ukraine. I think there's a good chance we're going to be moving towards Iran and China as far as the United States empire is concerned. And so China becomes very important in this. And so moving that over to the Satanic Matrix part, I'd like to move to the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard, who wrote a book called Simulacra and Simulation. And if we look at what's going on today with AI fake video, you have AI bots. You don't know if you're reading a comment from a real human or something on social media or talking to a real human. You have psyops on top of psyops, inside of psyops. You're constantly being hit by fake news. So we're entering this realm of unreality. It's technology is taking. There's always been, top-down imposed viewpoints, but technology is taking it to new levels. And so Baudrillard said that we'd be entering a phase of high-tech end-stage empire, where I think we're kind of at now. And the most difficult thing during that time would be determining discerning the real from the unreal. And so Tao acts as like a navigational system. It's a GPS. If you're living in the world of illusion, or what the Hindus call Maya, really you need something to help you guide you through that, to decipher the headlines and what they're feeding you, what to do, what's real, what's not real. And I think Tao makes an excellent navigational system. As far as China goes, to me, it looks like we're seeing the U.S., I call it the U.S. Anglo-Zionist empire, just because there is a strong Zionist, component of it. I mean, you just have to look to what happened in Gaza, what's happening now, the genocide, the Israel lobby, as per Mersheimer. And then you have the original United States that took over from the British Empire post-World War II. So you have all these factors converging, plus advanced technology. And so we're moving towards this neo-feudal technocracy at the same time. And who's running that? Well, on our side of the empire, it's the what I would call global finance. Really, it's running it. If you go back to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, you had these private banks really take control of the United States economy. And, one could argue this process started after the Civil War, when European bankers loaned both the South and the North money, and they got into debt. And 50 years later, you had the Federal Reserve Act. And so from my viewpoint, we're facing two powers. We're facing the United States Anglo-Zionist empire on one side and its vassal states, which we see in Europe, the UK, and we see China, Russia, Iran, BRICS, looking for an alternate economic system. As far as the United States goes, we're kind of locked into this, global finance system. And if you look on how it makes its money, a lot of negativity, wars, genocides, pollution, confusion, usury, exploitation, slavery, debt slavery, more specifically. And I don't think the U.S. could get out of that. I think it's kind of been locked in past the point of no return. I think this is a Rome 2.0 situation. I think it is a dying empire. And I think that the showdown is between China and the U.S., empire. So that's pretty much where I'm at. Between the two sides, I would rather go with the China system, and then by extension, Russia, Iran, and, some alternate system with a multipolar world. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions here, and before continuing, I just wanted to share. I wanted to say, as you mentioned for yourself, you have the Tao is your guide, spiritual technocracy. My guide is for myself is the Bible. I know for listeners, it's other stuff. But I like to converge with everyone, and a lot of our lines, some of our stuff overlaps, some of it doesn't. And someone made a comment on X. I want to just share this real quick. Today, if people can, you can see my screen. This guy called Michael Finberg. So he's talking to Dr. Jack Rasmus, who's an old school leftist, the kind I can get down with, who's been a guest on my show. And Michael says he's a fan of Jack. He says Geopolitics in Empire is a weird podcast. 2/3 of it is utter claptrap. But that's how I found you, Dr. Rasmus, a few more rigorous leftist academics, my shadow brain trust. And what response does Rasmus give to this guy? He says, so why don't you just get lost then? He's defending geopolitics and empire. And then this guy says, oh, I've got 30,000 subscribers on X. Not too shabby. And my response to him was, hey, I'll take that. I'll take this as a compliment. But I wanted to show this clip from Gerald Celente because it's relevant to you and me speaking. Here's just a quick few seconds from Celente and being a political atheist.
Good, bad, ugly, whatever. We're political atheists. You got to grow the hell up. Oh, I'm a Democrat. Oh, I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. I'm a liberal. How about you're an open-minded person and you don't lock yourself into a little gate? Could you figure that one out?
So basically, I mean, I think that's a good example of you and me talking. And what I try to do here at Geopolitics and Empire, I talk to everyone, and it's up to listeners to discern and take what you like, discard what you don't like, and just to then continues for some of my questions. You mentioned the U.S. Sergei Glaziev, the Russian minister, on his Telegram, he recently posted, does he know something that we don't know? That he says America is about to experience its perestroika a moment. I've had on Dmitry Orlov many times. He wrote a book long ago that America would experience its sort of Soviet collapse moment. Bloomberg posted this week on the dollar. They're saying the dollar is in danger. So maybe on that point, what are your thoughts on the American empire? Because I was born in the U.S. and I've been just pondering about American empire for decades. That was one of the reasons I started this podcast, because it's fascinating. And you mentioned in one of your articles, you say the U.S. Anglo-Zionist empire has three branches. The American government is divided into three branches: war with Russia first, war with Iran first, war with China first. And Francis Boyle, who just passed, he's been a guest on the podcast. One of my interviews with him in 2020, he said the end game is Russia, Iran, and China. Just kind of like what you pointed out, and it seems like we're maybe going to make peace with Russia, temporary peace, and then pivot elsewhere. But just thoughts on the American empire and its status.
Sure. First, just to say, you said you use the Bible as a navigational tool. I identify as a Jewish Hebrew Israelite who follows the Tao, so I use the symbols and archetypes of the Bible as well. So I utilize it just as a point. As far as the American empire goes, I think that it's been hollowed out to the point of no return. I think it is collapsing. If you look at, when globalization, I really think put that into high gear when the United States bankers like Rubin, Larry Summer, they outsourced the manufacturing to China to create Chimerica, whereby China would be the manufacturer of the world and buy our debt, and the United States would become a militarized, toxic financial instrument, and that's basically what the U.S. has become. I think what it boils down to as far as empire, I think as far as global finance goes, which I think is the main power control of all this. I mean, it's been integrated. You have the media, you have the deep states, you have the military industrial complex, you have multinational corporations, you have an oligarchy. And like you said, it's divided into three parts. In school, you learned it was the executive, legislative, and executive branches, but it's really war with Russia first, war with China first, or war with Iran first. But the point being that this oligarchy knows that this thing is going down because they hollowed it out too much. You can't destroy educational system of a nation. You can't have this level of weaponized immigration. And I'm not against immigrants, but they have been weaponized. You can't take mass population transfers and just throw them on other countries and expect the countries to absorb that. That destroys whatever the indigenous, culture is. And if you want a great example of that, look at the native red Indian, or Palestine. You could have, and I'm not saying it's that violent, but I'm just saying it disrupts a country, and that's what they've done. So you factor all these things in, and look at Rome towards the end. If you look at the Roman legion, it was mostly it wasn't really, there was very few ethnic Romans, and it was mostly a foreign mercenary force or army. So I think they know this thing is crashing, and the question is, can they jump to China? Because they need a headquarters. And that's what this war is really about. Can the global finance oligarchy and its platform upload to China before, collapse? If China lets them in, which that's what the pressure is about, then I don't think you're going to have a major war, because they'll just transition over and operate out of Beijing. And that's what we have to, that's what we need to see if that happens. So
And
that's
Yeah, and just going back to what you said earlier, again, one of my biggest obsessions is globalism, because I think a lot of things, a lot of events that are going on, geopolitical events and so forth, um, are dictated by the end game of world government. You know, there's this talk of Trump integrating in Canada. I was just pointing out this week there's a delegation from Alberta in Canada going to DC to ask Trump to become part of the U.S. Panama, Greenland. This is a plan from a century ago. The the Technocracy, the Cecil Rhodes roundtable, the British occult elite. So, none of this, and their end game explicitly in their own documents, official documents, is world government, unifying Europe first and North America first, and then integrating those into the Atlantic Union. So that's why I bang on about a lot world governments. Just your thoughts sort of on, you mentioned empire. It's like essentially they want a world empire, right? A one world empire. Every emperor in history has wanted that. Rome, Alexander, but they could, if they could have kept going, they would have taken the whole planet, right? Hitler and so forth. But they didn't have the technology like we do, I think, today. So just maybe your further thoughts on this program for world empire, whatever one wants to call it. The elites in Globalism, they say global governance. It's not a government, it's global governance. But just your thoughts.
Sure. Well, just as far as globalization goes, I think we have these two, this illusion of right and left. I think if you look at the right or the left in Europe or America, I think they're controlled. I mean, talk about the mainstream right and left. I think they're controlled by the same forces. Look at if you look at the Ronald Reagan revolution, I say, from my viewpoint, that was Milton Friedman neoliberalism, leading to globalization. And if you look at this DOGE, I think it's a simulation. In other words, we're going to clean out the waste. We're going to free up the bankers and the corporations to make money. It's a business thing. We're going to make America great. Before Reagan, you had the defeats by the North Vietnamese. So America felt like beaten down, weak American citizenry. And so this was a revitalization psyop. And if you look at DOGE, what happened? We just got through woke, the rainbow flag psyop, all this stuff, and so now we're going to become, hype. We're going to become He-Man again and kick some butt. These psyops are recycled. They're simulations, as Baudrillard said. It's simulations of simulations. So the first thing I think people need to do, as you said, is get rid of this right-left paradigm. This is being controlled by higher forces. As far as the global one world government goes, Orwell wrote about this in 1984. I mean, Eurasia, East Asia, Oceania. So sure, what does power always want? It wants more power. You can't satisfy it. So the question really, the U.S. Anglo-Zionist empire is on board with one world government. What really remains to be seen is, will China want to keep its 5,000-year-old civilization? In other words, China's ruling class. Well, because once you go globalization, it's over. Your culture is finished. You see that in Europe and the United States. So is there loyalty on the part of the Chinese elites or ruling class where they will not destroy their nation states or subsume it? Where will they keep their culture? And I would even say their DNA. Because if you look at what's going on, part of this system is about nanotechnology, DNA hijacking. I mean, they want control, full spectrum control. They want to go inside your body. They are working on brain chips. What's the difference between Elon Musk, from my viewpoint? We have Bill Gates over here with he's an unappointed czar during the pandemic who's pushing nanotechnology, and now we have this economic czar. Unelected. I meant unelected, not unappointed. He was appointed, obviously, by somebody. We have this unelected czar, Elon Musk, who's the head. He's the economic czar, and he's what part of his game is brain chips, and this Skynet stuff, And so, does this technology of Gates, a nanotechnology of Gates, connect with this brain chip, connect with this Skynet system of satellites? I think this right and left thing and this pendulum MAGA they just brought the woke psyop to make people more receptive to the next psyop, which is the right-wing psyop, the left-wing psyop to the right-wing psyop, which, as you stated, I think their ultimate goal is world governance, some kind of, I call it the high-tech kingdom of hell on earth. They want to create this dystopian civilization where they want to turn us into basically they want us for torture, entertainment, medical experimentation, and culling, some kind of Malthusian culling of the useless eaters, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing eye to eye there. I mean, that's clear. Some folks, a portion, hopefully a minority that listen to Geopolitics and Empire, they're kind of getting angry with my calling out the Trump Musk MAGA 2.0 train, and it's clear as day. And I was talking about this for months, if not years, pointing to this being the play. I've been saying that, and I think this whole attack on Trump, after 2016. That it was actually contrived artificially by the deep state, as you say, to sort of wind us up. And then those 4 years of Biden were just all artificial sort of game to then spring this pendulum to the other side. And through Trump, he's not fighting the deep state. He is the deep state, in my opinion. He's implementing the New World Order. And, I was saying, the U.S. Air Force, I think, just recently said they've had the best recruiting numbers in 15 years. And I said, they're going to put Trump in because a patriot American conservative is going to go fight for Biden and the woke American empire. No one's going to sign up. But, if you put in Trump, you're going to get these recruitment numbers to go to war with Iran or China or whoever you like. And so before moving on, just further thought, I mean, does that make sense for you that it was kind of contrived, this attack on Trump?
I agree 100%. The woke agenda worked for Russia. For Iran and China, you want the patriot, the nationalist, who's gonna these guys aren't going to fight for drag queens. I mean, nothing against drag queens. I mean, that whole thing was a psyop. All of a sudden, some drag queen singing in a gay, doing cabaret in a gay bar suddenly becomes this all-powerful entity of drag queens. This was totally manufactured. And like you said, because who are they going to get to sign up to fight China? The Christian Zionist movement. We're going to fight the godless heathen Chicoms, right? I mean, that's the selling point for this. The Bible Belt and the South was traditionally a big recruiting base for the U.S. military. So this whole Trump thing sells it, and that's why they're putting back the pendulum swinging the other direction. It's a total psyop. And Iran also, let's fight the Islamic, fight them over there so we don't fight them over here. That we saw that whole rap with the George W. Bush thing, with the Islamic terrorists, even never mind that Osama bin Laden was here. All those Islamic fighters, Al Qaeda were trained by the CIA and funded, so.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Christian Zionism. I'm a fundamentalist Christian. I'm not ashamed to say it, but it's kind of like, this it's a strange fire. This, it's a biblical term. This Christianity in America today. You mentioned China. It's like, the Christian world that I come from is that of the Dietrich Bonhoeffers and Richard Wurmbrands. It's like, if you go to China, it's about you go preach Christ to the Chinese in China and lay down your life as a martyr if necessary. You're not going to go blow up the Chinese. The point is to preach the gospel, and you give up your life if you have to, but not like, as you're saying, this sort of weird Christian Zionism that's going on right now. And just to go back to what you're talking about, the they, right? Who's running the show? I really like Mark Passio's term, the occultocracy. And I just see it as this sort of global money occult. They have a cult ideology. I'm mixing my language here now. Ideology, but and they're connected through money, power. And for me, one of the biggest questions is what you sort of brought up: the Anglo-American Zionist faction and the East. And that's my biggest question: is China and Russia, the collective Kremlin, let's say, because you see BRICS implements a lot of the same globalist technological programs, right? Sustainable development, the technocracy stuff. Every country is doing it now. Here in Mexico, I just read yesterday, they're rolling out smart cities all over Mexico. And then you've seen tentacles of the West in Russia, in China, and kind of you started bringing it up. Is China willing to give up their culture? The Chinese embassy to the U.S. just tweeted this week saying, we're ready to go to war if U.S. wants war. So I'm kind of trying to square these circles of like, okay, on one hand, they all agree on aspects of globalism, but on the other hand, there is apparent, friction. How do you sort of explain that? And we've had Kissinger go to China to open it up. Bill Gates in the 90s went into China, and so there's these links there. Just for your further thoughts on the they who runs the world, and then how that factors in with the Russians and the Chinese.
Wow, yeah, you touched on a lot of interesting points. So let's go to the occult angle. What is money really? Money is just a symbol, right? I mean, whether it's you push a button and you create it on a computer with just a bunch of numbers, which is what's doing now. You don't even have real metals in money anymore. It's totally an illusion. So whoever has the power to press that keyboard and create money out of thin air runs the planet, basically, because the planet is run on capitalism, or the exchange transactions, monetary transactions. So really, whoever's in that inner circle is running the show. As far as China goes, yeah, they're definitely there's a definite element of technocracy to that. China benefited from globalization, no doubt. That's what made them powerful. So I don't blame them for taking that deal. Like you said, the question is, does China keep its culture? And that's where from my viewpoint, that's why I focus on China, because what's really going to determine for the fate of the human race, whether we move on to a Kardashev to level 2 civilization, Star Trek, that stuff, or we go into extinction or some nightmare dystopia, is if China retains its core value of Taoism, Confucianism, because that creates balance. That is really the stop, because once you start developing these high levels of technology, it's really hard to keep from going off the deep end. And the technology advances, especially with AI, advances at such an exponential rate. You have to have a yin-yang balance of spirituality and technology. If you just have technology like we have in the United States and kill spirituality, you're going to go into Brave New World, 1984, every 1960s, 1970s dystopian sci-fi movie, 1980s Running Man, whatever you've watched, that's where when worse. So I think I focus a lot on China because China needs to keep that yin-yang balance of spirituality and technology with a spiritual technology that was invented by China, not brought in from the outside, but is actually organic. And that's what'll be the difference if China just continues. I call it Ziocorp. If it becomes Sinocorp, there's going to be some form of in a technological system. It's a balancing act, and what I would like to see is China retain its spiritual foundations. And all cultures do that, whether it's France, anywhere in South America, Africa, United States, whatever, Mexico. At the same time, having a win-win cooperation. In other words, we need to work together as a planet. You have Fukushima pouring radioactive waste into the ocean at unprecedented levels. We need to come together globally to figure out a post-scarcity society that's going to take the brains of all nations. So I think that China has to come up with globalization with Chinese characteristics, maybe call it something else, because I think globalization has been ruined as a term. It's like neoliberalism or neoconservatism. You can't really use it anymore. So maybe the merchant with Chinese characteristics.
Well, and yeah, getting into the technocracy is kind of, as you mentioned, I see this world, globalist, liberal, globalist, satanic world empire that's trying to take over the planet as like a blob. and it's eradicating, as you mentioned, culture, spirituality. And if China sort of gives up on that, they'll be integrated, right? And then the whole world will be dominated by this sort of Babel, multicultural, globalist system where culture's been erased, and it's just been this thing has been imposed on the entire planet. And then, as you say, we move into this sort of dystopia, this global dystopia. And just to get your further thoughts on what the game is with the technocracy, you know, I've been talking. We've had Patrick Wood on the podcast. One of my favorite interviews was with Edwin Black, the Jewish historian who wrote about IBM and the Germans, the Nazis, and how they created the paper. It was like the first sort of COVID pass, basically, the IBM created to be able to classify the population, you know, in Germany. And you know, a lot of us know, Mark PSYOP points out Hitler was backed by the Anglo-American crowd and the occult factions, and he classed not only Jews but I'm a Slav. You know, my grandpa was a prisoner of the Croatian Nazi regime for 6 months, and so people like me were Untermensch in this society. And so my point is, Edwin Black, he calls the social credit system the algorithm ghetto, right? And this is now being built all around us. Some of us are being debanked. Now they're bringing in these digital sort of checkpoints. I'm reading every day now, countries all over the place, Malaysia, Cameroon, they're bringing in mandatory digital ID, which you're going to need for any function in life, private or public. I was just reading this yesterday in Malaysia. So you won't be able to do anything without permission from the powers that be. And if you commit wrong think, like in Orwell, thought crime, you won't be able to buy food, travel, work, nothing. And as Edwin Black, if you just extrapolate, no one's going to come knocking on your doors, he says, like in the Soviet times. You're just going to die slowly in your house because you can't buy food. Your neighbor's not going to help you because then he'll be thrown in the algorithm ghetto. And so just your further thoughts on sort of this technocracy that they're trying to build out and so forth.
Well, thank you for that great segue. Since you follow the Bible, let's look at the book of Revelation, where they say you can't buy or sell if you don't have the mark. What is the mark? It's probably some kind of hand chip or barcode or brain chip. I agree 100%. They're just going to shut off the spigot. We saw that with the Canadian trucker protest. You can't get any money. Everything is, to get in a house, everything is smart, smart appliances. You won't be able to go in your house. You won't be able to take transportation. You won't be able to buy anything at the supermarket. You won't be able to get any money. They'll just shut off the flow and you will just simply die. And that's so you can't buy or sell. The beast. What is the beast? To me, there's two beasts in the book of Revelation. I think one is AI. It's some super quantum AI computer, and the other beast, is some human, using the archetypes and symbols. So yeah, it's crazy. That's what they want. And the problem is they also want transhumanism. These people want to play God, and that's where they're anti-Tao. Tao looks to the natural world to work in harmony. These people want to rise above the natural world. They want to be gods. And that's, that was really, what this whole thing was about, transgender, I'm not attacking transgenders. They exist in Asia, the Native Americans, prior to this and societies. But this whole thing was, this transhumanism thing is they want to create a new human. On one hand, you have a lower caste human, like in Brave New World and Epsilon, which are trying to create us, destroying our food, destroying our water, poisoning us, putting nanotechnology. On the other hand, they want to be immortal gods. That's their transhumanism. And so they're crazy. And when you have no restraint on power, you could go to realms that are unimaginable. Whatever the sickest thing in your mind you could imagine, that's what they'll do. There's no limit to what these people are capable of. And yeah, it's insane. That's why, like I said, I go back. I have, multiple missions that are important to me, but trying to do everything I can to promote China to keep its spiritual base as it's a big player in the coming events is a big part, a large part of it.
I did a great interview on the podcast. People can check the archive with Mary Harrington, who wrote a fantastic book, and she was a former feminist, I think, and she wrote about. I never thought about this. How she's talking about transhumanism and how birth control was effectively like one of our first forays into transhumanism, because what you're doing is you're sort of augmenting yourself, and then you just extrapolate, you go further, the transgender stuff. And I think some people have argued, they want to bring in humanoid robots, AI, robots to be employed. And when you employ someone, you're male or female, but if you employ a robot, it doesn't have a gender. So some people have argued this whole transgender thing was just, it's not about transgenderism per se. If you get my gist, it's about sort of paving the way for this androgynous, part of this occult, people say there's this, you've got the fallen angels and Satan, and they don't have, Lucifer, they don't have genders. And so there's this whole occult angle on androgyny and transgender. And then you've got this robotic angle, and these different angles. It was kind of like breaking the ice to pave way for this transhuman world they want to bring us into. And just going back to the technocracy and dystopia for a second, do you think it's feasible? Because we have examples. It seems like they are behind on trying to implement a lot of this stuff. Going back to the North American Union, it seems like they're trying to accelerate a lot of this stuff. It's been taking a long time. They have succeeded in some ways, they've failed in others. I just take examples like here in Mexico, a lot of the technocracy often doesn't work. They got to come back a second time, a third time. So I see them advancing in many fronts. I just wondered, do you think it's gonna be feasible? I think they're going for the core choke points or nodes, which is like your access to banking, different government licenses and permissions. And so if they can get those, they'll have their hands on the main choke points. But do you think that this will be feasible in the end, what they're trying to do?
From my viewpoint, I think ultimately they're going to crash it. Because, like you said, they want the main choke points. The problem is they have counter intentions in the sense that on one hand they're hollowing the societies out. They're dumbing them down. They're greedy. They're stealing everything from the house, the copper wires, the plumbing, the copper wiring, everything. On the other hand, they're really putting in some heavy stuff. If you look at the technology of like suppression, it's pretty it's. I hate to use the word awesome, but it's pretty impressive as far as, they could zap pretty much anybody out with the touch of a button, where we are in essence prisoners. Most people can't face that. Your constitutional freedoms, all that's gone. If you get on their hit list, zap, you're finished. And there's not one politician, there's not one chief of police, there's not one media outlet, major media outlet that's going to like investigate. You're done. And so you'll be disappeared. So they're competing against. So they're kind of diametrically opposed to themselves. There's some cognitive dissonance there. I don't think they'll ultimately succeed, but I think they could do a lot of damage before they go down. Not least of which is really screwing up the planet from an ecological standpoint. You have nukes, you have all kinds of stuff. You have poisons, biological weapons. I know there's a conspiracy of whether nukes exist. I was reading, so I'm not going to get into that unless you want to.
But just your maybe brief thought on that. What do you think about that?
My viewpoint is nuclear weapons exist for this reason. If you look after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there seemed to be a lot of radiation sickness. Looking like there was some kind of radioactive device detonated. If you look at the Bikini Islands, when they did the nuclear tests there, which they destroyed, one of the most beautiful spots on the planet, the Bikini Atoll you can't replace that, what they did. You had a lot, you had thyroid cancer with the natives who were moved. You had a lot of cancer with the Navy personnel that were in the area. And my viewpoint is if you could create nuclear power, you could create a nuclear bomb. What was Chernobyl? You had the 3 Mile Island meltdown. What was Fukushima? So from my viewpoint, there's some kind of nuclear energy. And so, if somebody could disprove that, I'll be happy to listen. But based on the evidence that I see, I think there are nuclear weapons.
No, I agree with you, and I think again, a lot of people when they listen to independent media, alternative media, when you go away from the mainstream is just propaganda and lies mostly today,
Right.
and there's this danger of going too far down the rabbit hole where you can't get out. And I always have to say, you got to have nuance. And there's a lot of these armchair sleuths. And I've lived in half a dozen countries. I've shaken hands with Gorbachev. I've got 3 citizenships, and it's like you got to get out there a little bit. And I lived in northern Kazakhstan, 100 kilometers from. I lived in Semey, which Semipalatinsk, which is in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, where they sent all the dissidents. Dostoevsky was in Semey for 5 years as punishment. I visited his home there. Semey is 100 clicks from the Polygon, the principal Soviet nuclear test site, where Stalin dropped the first bomb in 1949, and supposedly they did 500 plus nuke tests from 1949 to 1990. They were above ground tests until 1961 or the 1960s because of the test ban treaties. After that, they were underground. So actually, it's an 18,000 square kilometer space, the Polygon. I went to Kurchatov, where is the Institute of the nuclear scientists, and they took me into the Polygon. I brought, because I knew I was going to Semey, and the first thing when you type in Semey, Kazakhstan, you see all this nuclear stuff, deformed Kazakhs, and I had 2 Geiger counters that I bought before I went to Semey. We lived there for 3 years, and I was on the ground zero, kind of as you're saying. I'm standing there. It's a huge swath of land. You see detonations, atomic lakes. You see mock metros that they built to test, what would be the effect on, if cities were blown up on metro systems. I'm standing on a radioactive patch of land. My Geiger counter is going off. And so I think nukes are real, as you say. However, as with what they often do, there's a real threat there, but they just hype it up, right? So I think the radiation goes away quicker than they tell us. So it's dangerous, but I don't necessarily believe in the nuclear winter theory. It's kind of like with the climate change stuff. I don't think CO2 is a threat. We are damaging the environment. It's not as bad as they say. So they make a mountain out of a molehill, so to speak. So just any thought on that? And I forget where you were going earlier.
Well, just to touch on your point about all these theories out there, so-called conspiracy theories, a term invented by the CIA after the Kennedy assassination, from my understanding. But the point is, if you're running PSYOPs, let's take 9/11, for example. You want to create really weird theories, like, it was holograms, nothing, this is all, there was no explosions. This is all like holograms from outer space or something, beamed in, you're watching like a projection. Because if you go really far out, it discredits the more reasonable theories. If you start going into like things that 99% of people won't believe that are really out there, everything gets discredited. And that's, I think that's by intent. I think they try to muddy the waters, divide and conquer, get everybody fighting, not over the main thing. So, take 9/11, for example. To me, the most important thing is not whether it was a detonation or the planes knocked it down. It was who did it. Was it an inside job? Everybody's fighting about all the and I'm not saying that's not important, but all the energy is going into like the mechanics of how it happened. To me, the real thought should be going, who did it? What were the motives? What were they trying to accomplish? Because that's the only way really, the other stuff is really important, but what is the, who benefits? I think, as Lenin said, and then Cicero maybe. So who benefits? And I think that's really always the question you have to ask yourself in these situations: who benefits?
Yeah, or just using COVID as an example. My point was like, we're trying to argue with people like, okay, there clearly was no pandemic. This was planned for years. My point is that it was to bring in the biggest goal of it was to bring in the technocracy, and then you've got these people who all of a sudden like infectious disease doesn't exist, and I'm like we're having a hard enough time telling people that what's going on with COVID, and then here you come like infectious disease doesn't exist. Or I interviewed a guy once who said he was a pagan, and he said 9/11, the towers was the earth eating the towers, and I'm kind of like, I mean, you can't get through to the masses. You know, it's a step one, right? If you go to like, it's like, sorry, it's game over. You've just shot yourself in the foot. So, I guess, you know, further thoughts I had was the neo-feudalism. If we go to the economy, I just see part of the Great Reset project is they're wiping out the middle class, and we're really seeing this globally. Housing, which is one of the, you know, the core of life, where, you know, I'm lucky I don't have to pay. I knew this many years ago. I'm like, I worked hard and fast to pay off my house so I don't have a debt, so I don't have to pay rent, or mortgage. And so now you're seeing people here everywhere, Mexico, North America, Europe, they can't afford homes. And then, you know, inflation is raging. And I think all of this is by part of how the system is built, as you were talking about earlier, but also by design. Because, you know, I learned Costco the other day, 70% is owned by BlackRock, right? And Vanguard. And so these same BlackRocks are buying up real estate globally. And so just your thoughts on this sort of neo-feudalism, because the goal, like in feudalism, is not to have a middle class. So it's just the 1% rich and the rest of us serfs. So your further thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, speaking of BlackRock, I mean, how are the housing prices so high in the United States when you have all these empty apartments, empty commercial real estate, empty houses that have been foreclosed and BlackRock is sitting on? It is totally artificially created. This is all by design. They told you the plan. You will own nothing and be happy. That's, you know, they do like to engage in predictive programming. They kind of I don't know if that's some kind of karmic thing where it helps mitigate the bad karma they create, so they kind of tell you in advance. But yeah, it's ridiculous. How could you have homelessness in the United States when you have all these empty domiciles? It's, you know, this is created. This is controlled scarcity. The world could be an abundant place. We have the technology to go. You know, we could all be living pretty large. I mean, if it was managed properly. But like you said, they want to destroy the middle class, the working class. They want us all, you know, part of the proletariat with a very small managerial class and their security systems. And they're taking their security systems to new levels with this technology. Killer drones, look, did you see, watch these robot dogs with the gun turrets? I mean, this stuff is frightening. You know, they're really coming down on this. So yeah, they want a neo-feudal technocracy, total control beyond anything in human history. That was COVID. They want to go in your body. They want to take over your DNA. That was what it was about. There might have been a bioweapon, like a minor one. I mean, these guys want to, you know, they have a lot of bioweapons they play with. You know, maybe they released a low-grade one. Just, you know, they like to play with their toys. You know, I don't know, but I think they released something. I'm not saying it was like super, but they probably wanted to test out their, you know, their stuff. And yeah, and what's the next phase of this? Probably digital currency. They're probably crashing the economy. So we go back to you can't buy or sell. What's an important component of monitoring every aspect of your life, getting in your body, the nanotechnology, and also you can't buy food. You can't get sheltered, you know, so they're going to crash and then they'll give us, Amazon money or, you know, X money, whatever. It'll be some kind of privatized corporate money.
Yeah, and just about that food aspect, you know, I had a guest on recently, John Kleisik, who's an expert in education, and he was talking about one of the goals was to bring in of the event of the 2020s was to bring in personalized precision medicine, which is related to DNA stuff, and then they want to bring in precision sort of education, and just on like genetically modified foods. I've noticed recently, even here in Mexico, where I try to when I eat clean, like I kid you not, when I have a lunch or dinner, a pure organic salad, just vegetables, with a whole bunch of vegetables and seeds and nuts, I sleep like a baby. It's incredible. But then, you know, I had the other night some food that later turns out had a bioengineered ingredients, GMO. I didn't sleep well, and the next day I was sneezing like crazy, having like an allergic reaction. And so there's kind of like, now they're messing with our DNA. And I did want to ask you about false flags. I don't talk about that as enough on the podcast. One of the reasons I just kind of feel like it's self-evident. Someone was asking me about, there's this shooting or that shooting. I'm kind of like, most of the time. You wrote a recent article about this. Let me just read an excerpt from your book, which people can download for free on your website. You say, as more people awaken, the tighter the owners clamp down on free speech, information access, civil liberties. Clampdowns take many forms, including corporate media monopolization, controlled scarcity, economics, problem solution, bioweapons, false flags, cognitive warfare, psyops, the police state jackboot, mass incarceration, assassinations, 24/7 AI surveillance, and killer robot dogs. And then you wrote in a recent piece for UNS, the interconnectivity of ramming motor vehicles into crowds. And every week now we're seeing these events. And I don't cover it a lot because it's kind of like, well, what can I do? Number one, number two, I mean, they're so frequent. And number three, it's kind of like, it's the same folks. And you can investigate those events to kingdom come, but it's really hard to get those truths across because the media just can, as we said earlier, it's to get that point across to the normies. It's on that point, it's difficult to get that across. And you write, ramming motor vehicles into crowds appears to be a deep state Mossad trend. Mass shootings, another. I'm not saying every public terror attack constitutes a false flag. Organic violent freakouts occur in high-stress societies, so I totally agree with you there. However, the high-profile ones generally reveal links to state actors, intelligence agencies with limitless funds and resources recruit or create broken people to harm innocents. Individuals with faulty or no codes are extremely susceptible to third-party implant programs and play the role of human grenade. At some point, both false flag and organic event, as well as the intelligence agency-created lunatic and society-created lunatic, merge into the collective consciousness, creating the zeitgeist. And again, you say, who benefits. I've interviewed on the podcast Trevor Aronson, who wrote the book on how the FBI manufactures terror. And he did an inventory since 9/11. Every, at least until he published the book, every domestic terror event in the United States had FBI informants or FBI undercover involved, where, just as you point out, they actually create the terror events. And we can talk, there's Gladio, strategy of tension. Look, one of the goals is to take away guns, disarmament. So just some of your thoughts on false flag operations, whether they're car rammings or shooting or whatever.
As you said, self-evident. I mean, remember when especially after 9/11, the FBI was making all those busts. They would get these, they would recruit like autistic Muslim guys from mosques. They would set up the truck. They would talk to they would, basically lead the guy over to the truck. They would tell him to push this button, which the FBI had created. This was all manufactured. It's, none of this is real. And if you look at, the major events of our time, false flag, 9/11, it always turns out to be, a big, the owners, the high up actors. So false flags have worked well. I guess they work. There's a history of false flags. You could go back to the Reichstag fires. Some say that was a false flag. But anytime you want to create like take away people's civil liberties, you create this terrorist attack, and so you're protecting the people from the terrorists. But it's worth it to give up your civil liberties because they have to get inside your banking because they have to get the terrorist funding, right? They have to read your emails and listen to your phones because they're spying on the terrorists. The false flag really acts as a way for people to give up their constitutional or whatever, wherever you live, your freedoms, your democratic protections. That is a big factor. It's also to keep the population in a state of fear. People are most easily manipulated when they are scared. That's psychology 101. You get a population in a state of fear and they will agree to almost anything.
Yeah, and we see it, whether it's the health scare or the geopolitical events like 9/11. For me, across the board, it's all the same. You mentioned the Germans have done it. Rome has done it. I believe, I'm not giving, people have tried to call me a Russian agent. I'm like, and it was the security state. These anonymous accounts on X, they were posting about me and geopolitics and empire, and I was just quote tweeting them. I'm like, I poop equally on the collective Kremlin as I do on Washington, London, and whatever, Brussels. I believe the 1999 Moscow apartment bombings was a Russian false flag operation. Everyone does it. Many European, Gladio, you're all across the board. European governments, German, French, whatever, Italy were involved in these false flag operations. So it's a common state tactic. I interviewed the late Lance DeHaven Smith, who wrote a book, Conspiracy Theory in America, and I like these different terms. He uses SCAD, state crimes against democracy. Before I ask you sort of about the way forward and what we can do, any solutions and that sort of stuff, is there any other sort of topic or theme that we haven't broached that you think is important?
I think we hit on the major ones. I mean, from my viewpoint, the human race, this is from the bigger picture. We're kind of hitting a crossroads of this technology that has the power to either exterminate the human race, warp it into some grotesque mutation of itself, or lead us onto a higher civilizational plateau, Kardashev levels 1 to higher civilizations. And I think that's why we're at the point. They talk about the greatest generation, right? I think we are the greatest generation, and by we I mean boomers, Gen X, millennials, Zoomers, people living in this crossroads, as to where we go. You were talking about different governments doing false flags. There's a security state, deep state mindset in every country. Anytime you set up intelligence agencies, you're going to get guys who want to do really wild, crazy stuff. You get a lot of sociopaths and psychopaths. That's just the nature of, intelligence agencies. What we could do about it, I think this is really where it gets a little crazy, because they've done a great job of atomizing us. Social media, the digital world, has taken us away from human communities. Something as simple as the bowling leagues that you used to see in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where people actually went places and got together and had human connections in groups. I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't exist at all, but that's been greatly atomized by putting us into these social media pods where you have, what do they call them? Incels. You have people, young men who they don't date anymore. They don't go out and have social lives, interact with women. You're having this really state of I guess, alienation and loneliness. And it makes it very easy when you disconnect everybody from everybody else. It makes it very difficult to put on a unified resistance, because we're all in our own little pods now, plugged in to the machine, getting all the stimulation, and the people who are programming these shows and the social media stuff are not good people. They're running cognitive warfare. This is being run out of the Pentagon, social media, all this stuff. So, I mean, I think we have to try to make human connections when possible. But the reality is you're going to have to do a lot of this on your own as well, just due to the nature of the beast. And that's from my viewpoint, that comes in where you have to have a code. And so it could be philosophical, but spiritual. So you have a spiritual code you use. I have a spiritual code I use. We have some overlap because of my archetype symbols and things I believe in. And so you have to follow your code. And by developing a correct code, and code is your ethical foundation. Code is basically your rule book that you place on yourself, that you're going to use as a navigational guide to guide you through the satanic matrix, so you will develop programs that help you function navigate better in the satanic matrix. They have their programs, you need counter programs because they're running intense programs. And I think since 9/11, COVID, I think this coming financial recession, hyperinflation crisis, they're ramping up their programs. So you got to ramp up your programs. You got to play a higher level game. And the code, you have one code, but out of that, if you have a solid code, you could develop many infinite number of programs because you're going to be facing this situation. You're going to be facing this situation. You're going to be facing this situation. It's like martial arts. You got to be ready to come from different angles. Everything's coming at you. You got to be blocking and punching and kicking and, thinking in reverse and then thinking forward and then thinking sideways, then thinking up, then thinking down. You got to get your mind right. And that's what it's about. And then optimally, you would have people who get their mind rights running correct codes, correct programs, because we're in the matrix. So if we're in the matrix, if we're in the satanic matrix, you better have a code. You better have your own program because you're going to be running third-party programs. You're going to be running their programs. They have a weird code, anti-human code, and you better you want to run a pro-human code. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, good stuff. There's a handful of people that will annoyingly comment and say, well, what's your solution, to geopolitics empire to me? And it's kind of like, don't ask me that question. I started this podcast as it's analysis. Well, one of my guests christened me as a chronicler. And that's what we're doing here. Myself and guests, we're just kind of figuring out what's going on, the lay of the land. If there's suggestions for solutions, great. If there's not, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. Don't, come to me for solutions. It's kind of, as you're saying, it's often up to each of us. I had a guest on years ago. I keep repeating this. He cited Teddy Roosevelt, love him or hate him, whatever. No one's perfect, but it's true what he said. Do what you can with what you got, where you're at, and that's it. And I think what you said is important as well. It's community, where you physically are located, friends, families, neighbors, acquaintances, and plugging in. It's funny. A lot of us have made friends in the digital realm because of these codes, as you say, that have affected the physical, the people around us who become sort of these NPC normies. So it's been kind of hard to connect with some of these people in the physical space because they've been programmed. Meanwhile, we're looking for the people online creating these digital tribes. But, through connectivity, globalization, often we're able to meet our new digital friends in person. I go to different conferences, people pass through Mexico. And so we're able to go from the physical to the digital and the back. And as you say, I think we have to focus a lot on the real world. All of your links are in the description. If you want to just tell us again where people can find you, your projects and all that.
Sure. So if you go to my website, Tao is now TAOISNOW.org. You could get my articles. You get a free download of the book, which touches on a lot of what we've discussed today and actually, methodologies to kind of navigating through this matrix. It's like you said. I mean, if you rely totally on the digital, they could shut that off. So if all your connections are digital, that could be ended with a touch of a button. So I think we also have to do the human thing, the real world, real human connection too. But you do what you can do. Like you said, what could one man do when the Roman Empire was collapsing in the end stages? You're limited by your resources and your actual, ultimately, you could say your ability to deal with violence, because it's a violent system. It runs on violence, and that's just that's the reality of it. It's a win-lose system.
What else can I say? May the odds be ever in your favor, as in the Hunger Games. That's what it is. So good fortune to all, and thank you for coming on the podcast, Richard.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's good talking to you. I really enjoyed it.